Most parents fear the first day of school, but for Alara, the real nightmare wasn't saying goodbye to her son. It was seeing who was watching from the shadows. 6 years ago, she fled a marriage of fire and blood. Today, that past just pulled up to the curb in a bulletproof SUV. Her ex-husband is back. He's more dangerous than ever, and he just realized his ex-wife has been hiding his only heir. But Caspian isn't here to take the boy. He's here because he's terrified. Stay tuned because the twist at the end of this story will change everything you think you know about sacrifice. Welcome back to Heartwoventales. I'm Selena, and I hope you're doing well today. I'm so excited you're here because we're diving into another story that will pull at your heart, twist your emotions, and leave you breathless. Before we start, I want to know something. Where are you watching me from right now? Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing all of you from around the world. And while you're at it, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think you'll love today's story? Be honest, I want to see your ratings. All right. Get comfy, maybe grab a cup of tea, and don't skip a single second. Every heartbeat, every twist matters in this tale. Are you ready? Let's step into the world of love, danger, and secrets that can change lives in an instant. Alara's fingers trembled as she tugged the straps of Koa's backpack over his tiny shoulders, the morning mist clinging to her hair like a damp silk veil, leaving the faint scent of wet earth and dew on her skin, her boots sinking slightly into the damp Oakhaven lawn as the bell's sharp clang echoed across the quiet street. Koa turned, his grin wide, missing a front tooth that made his smile both innocent and oddly familiar, and she felt her chest tighten as if someone had squeezed it with invisible hands, a mixture of pride and dread twisting inside her, while the black SUV idling across the street seemed to breathe in rhythm with her own heartbeat, its engine a low, threatening growl that reminded her of nights in Chicago when she had lain awake, listening to distant sirens, knowing Caspian's shadow loomed closer than anyone suspected, even when he wasn't there. She straightened, smoothing her wool coat over her chest, feeling the damp fabric stick momentarily, and Koa's small hand slipped into hers, warm and soft, a stark contrast to the icy chill curling around her spine. And for a moment she considered turning back into the house. Why hiding in the familiar sanctuary of her living room where no one from her past could touch them? But the memory of a white rose left on her doorstep 6 years ago flashed through her mind, each petal pristine, each thorn a silent warning. And now there it was again, abandoned on the curb, startlingly alive against the gray asphalt, delicate but deliberate, a messenger from a world she had tried to bury forever. "Koa, wait," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat as she crouched again, brushing a strand of damp hair from her forehead, the mist sticking to her eyelashes and making her blink repeatedly. And for a heartbeat, she imagined the rose wilting in her hand, then snapping upright as if holding a message just for her, and she wondered whether it was hope or a herald of old storms returning. The boy's small voice broke the momentary trance. "Mom, can we go now? The bus—" But Alara's eyes were fixed, unseeing on the black vehicle that hadn't moved in all these seconds that felt like lifetimes, and a prickling sensation crept across her neck and down her arms, a physical warning she had learned to recognize long ago, that sense she had felt before a confrontation, before a betrayal, before a moment that changed everything, and her breath hitched as her memories collided. The cold marble floors of Caspian's Chicago penthouse, the metallic tang of his cologne mixed with blood from a bodyguard she hadn't even known was dead, the precise, cruel way he smiled at victories that never felt like triumphs. And she realized, with a cold jolt, that thread was being tugged again. A connection to the past she had tried to sever with distance, with silence, with 1,000 promises whispered into the night to herself that she would never return to that life. Koa wriggled, tugging her hand, his innocence a dagger of contrast, and she forced a tight smile. "Go on, baby, get to class." But her eyes never left the SUV, noting every detail. The matte black paint swallowing the morning light, the tinted windows hiding whatever eyes were inside, the faint scratch along the driver's side door that looked almost deliberate, like a warning scratched into metal, and a thought pricked at her mind. What if he was watching already, his gaze slicing through glass and mist to find them here, in the quiet suburb where no one knew their names or their pasts? A shiver ran down her spine as Koa ran toward the schoolyard, his tiny backpack bouncing, and she realized she didn't even remember the last time she had felt free to watch him without that looming shadow pressing down, the fear that Caspian's presence could erupt into their lives at any moment, the same way a storm arrives suddenly and devastates everything in its path. The air smelled faintly of wet grass and chalk from the playground lines, mixed with the faint aroma of pastries from the corner bakery that usually offered comfort. But today even sugar and flour seemed tainted, carrying a whisper of danger. Her fingers brushed the handle of the white rose, and the scent hit her like a punch of memory. The same delicate perfume Caspian had always used, the one that clung to his shirts, the one that made her stomach twist into knots when he leaned close. Then when he whispered words she had long forgotten, and the timing, today, the anniversary of their divorce, made her knees buckle under the weight of unspoken history, the realization that no matter how far she ran, some connections were iron chains disguised as petals. She noticed the rose had a faint dew on it, reflecting the morning light in tiny prisms, and she could almost hear the echo of Caspian's voice 6 years ago, smooth, dangerous, promising both love and ruin, and her hand itched to crush the flower, to deny the past its power, yet part of her wanted to cradle it, as if understanding it could somehow protect Koa from a fate he never asked for. Her eyes darted back to the street, half expecting the car to move, half hoping it wouldn't, and her pulse raced as a neighbor's dog barked in the distance, a sharp, staccato sound that made her jump and glance at Koa, who was already absorbed in playground chaos, laughing with other children, completely unaware that the shadow of his father, the man whose blood ran in his veins, was so close, a predator disguised in civilian clothing, observing, calculating, waiting. She tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear and swallowed hard, feeling the rough texture of her scarf scratch against her skin, grounding herself in the present, yet every fiber of her body screamed that this was no ordinary morning, that the thread between past and present had been yanked taut, and that whatever was coming could unravel the careful tapestry of life she had stitched for herself and her son. The SUV door didn't open, but a subtle movement inside caught her eye, a shadow crossing the interior, a silhouette that felt disturbingly familiar, and she felt her stomach drop, a tight, twisting fear that had been buried deep since the day she fled Chicago, the same fear that had made her flee, made her hide, made her whisper promises to Koa that the world was safe. The engine purred, then the car rolled slowly away, deliberate, almost ceremonial, leaving behind the stark, white rose on the curb, a message that carried both love and threat, a duality that she had only ever known from Caspian, and the way it rested there made the street feel suddenly smaller, suffocating, like the walls of an invisible cage. She noticed a single drop of water clinging to a pedal, trembling as if alive, and she reached for it, fingers brushing the soft white silk, the contrast of softness against the hardness of concrete shocking, and for a second she thought she could almost hear a whisper. "I see you, Alara. I've never stopped." Her hand recoiled instinctively, and she realized that every instinct she had honed for survival over 6 years was screaming at her that the past was not just present, it was hunting her, threading through the mist, threading through Koa's laughter. threading through the white rose that held all the danger and devotion of a man who ruled empires and hearts with equal ruthlessness. She stood up slowly, mist clinging to her coat, feeling the weight of every memory in the subtle stiffness of her shoulders, and she could hear her own heart hammering against her ribs, a loud staccato drum of fear and anticipation. Koa turned, looking back at her, eyes sparkling, oblivious, and she bent down, adjusting his coat collar, inhaling the faint scent of his shampoo, his warm skin, his tiny, impatient fidgeting, and a pang of guilt stabbed her. Was she preparing him for a normal life, or simply delaying the inevitable intrusion of a man who would never forgive absence, who would never let go of bloodlines and betrayals? She forced a smile and whispered, "Go on, baby. Be a good boy." But her lips trembled, and she glanced again at the rose, at the black SUV now disappeared, at the empty street suddenly loaded with possibility, and she wondered, have you ever felt the past reach out to you in a way that made every choice you thought was safe suddenly feel dangerous? How would you react if someone you thought gone forever found you and your child at the same time? 2. Alara's pulse hadn't slowed since the rose on the curb, the black SUV, and Koa's oblivious laughter. She stepped into the grocery store, the automatic doors sliding open with a whoosh that seemed louder than usual, and immediately the warmth of heated air and the faint smell of bread and cleaning chemicals hit her like a wave, clinging to her damp coat, and she shivered despite the indoor comfort. Fingers tightening around her shopping basket as though its flimsy plastic could somehow shield her from what she didn't yet see. She moved down the first aisle, ears straining to catch the sound of footsteps behind her, the soft hum of fluorescent lights above, the distant chatter of tired cashiers, and her gaze flicked from the cereal boxes to the shiny freezer glass, noticing every slight movement, every flicker of shadow, feeling the familiar twist of fear and adrenaline that had become a second heartbeat since Chicago. Her hand, trembling, hovered over Koa's favorite cereal, its bright packaging almost mocking in its cheerfulness. And just as her fingers brushed the cardboard, a second hand, broad, scarred, veined, slid across the same box, stopping hers as though claiming territory. On the sleeve of a luxurious wool coat, brushing hers with the faint smell of sandalwood and leather. And she froze, heart in her throat, her breath catching in shallow, uneven gasps as her eyes slowly raised to meet the face of Jace, Caspian's enforcer, his eyes cold and calculating, like steel frozen over a dark river, unreadable, but alive with intent. He didn't smile, didn't speak, yet there was a terrifying calm in the way he held the cereal box out to her, fingers steady, nails clean, knuckles white against the fabric of his coat, and Alara realized that a man so quiet could be infinitely more dangerous than someone shouting, his silence screaming in the language of threats she knew too well. She inhaled sharply, the smell of polished floors, the faint aroma of store-bought cinnamon rolls, one and the sterile tang of disinfectant filling her nose as Jace leaned slightly, and she saw the tiny twitch of his jaw, the faint scar above his brow, the way he measured every heartbeat between them, every pause loaded with unspoken meaning. Her tongue felt thick, her throat dry as he whispered just above the hum of the store music, slicing through her mind, "He isn't looking for a fight, Alara." And the words wrapped around her ribcage, a vice tightening with cold precision, and she knew instinctively he meant Caspian, the shadow that had haunted her dreams and street corners for 6 long years, the man whose absence had been her lifeline, whose presence now threatened to unravel every careful step she had taken. "He's been watching the boy for 3 days," Jace continued, leaning closer, his cologne sharp and intrusive in her senses, marveling at how much of his own fire is in that child's eyes, and Alara's stomach dropped, twisting violently, nausea rising as if her body was rejecting the reality that the monster she had fled from had not only found them, but studied them, learned them, and was now circling, patient, precise, and lethal. Her fingers gripped the cereal box tighter, nails pressing into cardboard, heart hammering as the thought of Koa being in Caspian's world made her limbs feel leaden, her body betraying her with shaking knees, and she realized she couldn't speak, couldn't move, trapped in the magnetic pull of dread. Jace's shadow engulfed her as he leaned in further, and she noticed the faint tremor of his hands, not out of fear but anticipation, a silent predator savoring the tension before the strike. And she wondered if she could escape this grocery store without drawing attention, without giving herself away, without letting Koa see that she had lost control of everything again. Her eyes flicked to the neatly stacked shelves, the dull metallic sheen of tin cans, the crisp packages of pasta, the artificial shine of breakfast cereals, and each object became a potential weapon or shield, a secondary action that grounded her while the emotional storm swirled in the pit of her stomach. She felt the coarse texture of the basket handle cut into her palms, the faint vibration of the floor from a passing cart, the subtle shift in air currents as someone walked near, and each detail sharpened her senses, pulling her into the moment with a physicality that made fear tangible, almost touchable. "Alara," Jace whispered again, voice a smooth, dark thread, and she flinched, spinning slightly, searching the aisle for an escape. But there was none. The other shoppers, oblivious, murmuring over produce and frozen goods, their casual existence highlighting the unnatural weight of danger pressing down on her, and she realized how fragile the bubble she had built around Koa truly was. He held the cereal box steadily, eyes locked on hers, and she could see the faint lines of calculation across his face, the crease between his brows, the twitch of a lip, all the micro-expressions of a man trained to dominate without raising a fist, and she felt her resolve falter, a shiver crawling down her spine. She swallowed, tasting the bitter tang of adrenaline in her mouth, the faint metallic hint of blood rushing to her temples as her mind raced through every escape plan she had ever imagined. None of which mattered because Caspian had always been steps ahead, and now his reach extended through this man. "Do you understand?" Jace's voice lowered, velvet and steel intertwined. "That he knows you lied on the birth certificate?" And the words landed with the weight of a hammer, crushing the illusion of safety she had built for Koa over 6 years. And she could feel the air compress around her, the freezer doors hissing as if in agreement with the threat, the lights flickering faintly overhead, shadows dancing unnaturally across the tiled floor. She swallowed, trembling, feeling the cardboard of the cereal box cut into her palms as she gripped it. A physical reminder that the world she thought she controlled was nothing more than a fragile facade, and she wondered if anyone watching from outside would see the tempest raging inside her, the fight between instinct to flee and maternal courage to stand. The soft hum of the refrigeration unit seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, and she noticed the faint scent of ozone, a whisper of electricity in the air, making her skin prickle as if tiny sparks danced along her nerve endings. Koa's small backpack strap slipped slightly from her fingers as her hand tightened, and a pang of panic struck. Was he already aware of the danger? Could he sense the weight of Caspian's gaze through some invisible thread, his young mind absorbing a world she tried to keep hidden? The polished linoleum reflected Jace's shadow stretching toward her like a dark river, and she instinctively recoiled, tripping slightly over the edge of a display stand, the mundane motion anchoring her in the present, even as her mind raced through memories of threats, whispers, and broken promises. The faint squeak of her shoes against the floor echoed in her ears, competing with the soft pop of the fluorescent lights, each sound amplified by her fear, and she realized that everyday sounds could betray her location, expose her vulnerabilities to a man who thrived on reading such minute details. She tried to speak, words caught in her throat, and her lips trembled as if forming sentences of warning to Koa. But no sound came, only the silent scream of her panic vibrating through her chest. Jace's gaze didn't waver, his lips curling subtly into something almost like amusement, and she noticed the faint scar above his cheekbone catching the overhead light, a reminder of a past battle, a life she didn't want to touch again but couldn't ignore. She felt her nails bite into the palm of her hand, the rough paper of the cereal box pressing uncomfortably against tender skin. And in that moment, the store became both prison and stage, every object around her a potential actor in a drama that had been written long before she arrived. The scent of warm bread drifted from a nearby display, cloying and incongruous, a reminder of domestic normalcy she had fought to build, yet it now felt like mockery in the presence of Jace and the unseen specter of Caspian. "In our world," Jace whispered, leaning almost too close, the words a knife pressed to her ear. "That kind of theft is punishable by more than just a lawsuit." And she felt the hair on her arms rise, goosebumps prickling in perfect synchrony. The sterile grocery aisles suddenly transformed into a battlefield of unspoken threats. Now and her fingers flexed around the cereal box as if ready to strike, to run, to scream, all at once. Her mind raced, a labyrinth of scenarios, each more terrifying than the last, and she caught herself noticing the mundane, the slight wobble in a stack of canned soup, the humming of a freezer door, the distant clink of coins at a register, and realized that even in ordinary tasks, danger could lurk, could manipulate, could annihilate. She felt the brush of air as someone passed too close behind, tension coiling in her chest, heart hammering against ribs, breath shallow, and wondered if she would ever feel safe again, in grocery stores, in playgrounds, in a life she had tried to rebuild. A bead of sweat traced her temple, the tactile awareness of her own body sharp, a signal of adrenaline, fear, and an impossible awareness that nothing about her existence could ever be ordinary while Caspian's shadow loomed. Her thoughts flitted to Koa, laughing in the distance, oblivious in the juxtaposition of innocence and threat tore at her stomach. She couldn't ignore, a question lingering like a blade. Have you ever realized that the person you fled from might already be circling the life you've built for your child? What would you do if that past predator wasn't satisfied with just observing? Alara's boots slapped against the cracked concrete of her driveway, the chill of early morning clinging to her calves, mist curling around her ankles like ghostly fingers, and her breath came in short, ragged bursts, a rhythm punctuated by the distant bark of a dog and the shrill whistle of the schoolyard she had left behind. On her hand still gripping the kitchen knife she had snatched from the drawer in a panic that had nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with the fear gnawing at her chest. Her coat was damp, clinging uncomfortably to her shoulders, a tactile reminder that no matter how far she ran, her body betrayed her anxiety, and she imagined Caspian's dark, calculating eyes scanning her every move as he had done so many times before, and the thought made her knees almost buckle. But adrenaline forced her forward, each step a battle against the icy fingers of dread tightening around her stomach. She flung open the front door, the hinges creaking like an old ship protesting its voyage, and the smell of her home, warm, faintly of leftover oatmeal and lemon-scented cleaning spray, mixed with the metallic tang of her fear, making her stomach churn. But the silence that greeted her was heavier than she expected, pressing against her eardrums as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Her fingers trembled around the knife, the cold steel vibrating slightly against her palm, and every shadow in the dim kitchen seemed to stretch unnaturally, threatening to spring to life. And for a moment she imagined Koa missing, snatched by the monster from her past while she had hesitated, and the mental image made her stomach knot into a tight, painful spiral. A soft giggle floated from the dining room, high and bright, piercing the tension like sunlight through fog, and she froze mid-step, heart hammering violently, listening for any further sound, noting the faint creak of the wooden floor under a chair leg, the scent of crayons on paper, the sweet tang of paints drying in the air. Then when she realized it was Koa, alive, safe, for the moment. Every nerve in her body screamed both relief and disbelief, and she gripped the knife tighter, though the danger had not fully passed, for her mind painted Caspian's presence everywhere, a shadow lurking behind doors, in reflections, in the hum of the refrigerator, in the very air around her. Stepping cautiously into the dining room, she spotted him, and the world seemed to stutter, freeze, and warp. Caspian Thorne, sitting in a wooden chair that looked like it would snap beneath his enormous frame, tailored suit clinging perfectly to broad shoulders, his hair immaculately combed despite the chaos that seemed to radiate from him, eyes dark pools of grief and simmering rage, a predator disguised as a man quietly observing, and Koa beside him, finger painting, giggling. A star-filled masterpiece spread across the paper. Her grip on the knife faltered as the warmth of domesticity collided violently with the fear that had been her constant companion for 6 years, and her chest tightened, catching in her throat, as Koa looked up and beamed. "Mom, look! My new friend knows all about the stars just like me." His small voice carrying a joy so pure it made the room feel both brighter and more dangerous at once. Caspian's eyes snapped toward her, and for a moment the carefully constructed Mafia Boss persona dissolved, leaving raw humanity exposed, a man robbed of his soul, grief, and anger mixing in a cocktail that could kill or protect. And she felt the air itself thicken, as if the house itself was holding its breath in anticipation. She noticed the small details immediately, the faint scuff of his shoe against the linoleum, the way the light caught the gold cufflinks on his wrists, the slight tremor of his knuckles as they gripped the table edge, veins visible under pale skin, and every subtle movement spoke louder than any words could, or a language of power, restraint, and barely contained emotion. Koa, oblivious to the tension, wiggled in his seat, smearing a streak of green paint across his own palm, and Alara's maternal instinct flared, a minor distraction from the storm inside her, grounding her in a secondary action as she wiped his hand with her scarf, feeling the texture of the wool, rough and soft at once, her own heartbeat trying to keep pace with the rapid drum of panic and disbelief. Caspian's gaze didn't leave her, though, and she could feel it crawling over her like silk laced with barbed wire, scanning, calculating, weighing each wordless movement, measuring threat and opportunity alike. And in that instant the air seemed too thin, heavy with memories, mistakes, and unspoken promises. She realized she was standing too close to the table. The knife awkwardly angled in her hand, and she lowered it slightly, realizing that confrontation here would be catastrophic, that this man had once ruled empires with a word, a gesture, a flick of his wrist, and now, even in this domestic moment, his presence could bend reality. Caspian's chest rose and fell, slowly, rhythmically, almost as if he were meditating amidst the chaos of his emotions, and she noticed the faint scent of his cologne, subtle but unmistakable, sandalwood and amber, and it hit her like a memory of every confrontation, every moment she had tried to flee, every time she had imagined hiding Koa from the darkness of his father. The tension was punctuated by the faint scrape of Koa's chair as he shifted to reach for more paint, and Alara felt herself leaning forward instinctively, ready to intervene, ready to shield, ready to fight with nothing but adrenaline and maternal instinct, her own pulse echoing in her ears like a drum. Caspian's lips twitched, almost imperceptibly, a sign of conflict, and she noticed the subtle clench of his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes, and the way he inhaled sharply through his nose, each micro-gesture a testament to a man accustomed to controlling everything yet powerless before the child before him. She took a small step back, the knife now resting loosely in her hand, noticing the tiny ridge of paint dried on Koa's fingertips, the faint stickiness on her own scarf as she wiped his hand, the scent of acrylics mingling with fear, tension, and the faint, inexplicable warmth of his father's presence. Her mind raced, plotting escape routes, rehearsing conversations, and imagining scenarios in which Caspian left without incident, each one collapsing under the weight of reality. He wasn't here to leave, he was here to reclaim, to observe, to stake a claim that had never truly been relinquished. Koa laughed again, bright and unaware, a sound that seemed to illuminate the tension like a sudden flash of lightning, and Alara felt her chest tighten, simultaneously buoyed by the boy's innocence and crushed by the knowledge that this laughter was being witnessed by the man who had haunted her for 6 years. Caspian's knuckles whitened further as he gripped the edge of the cheap kitchen table, and for a moment, the mundane, his polished shoes on the worn linoleum, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, became surreal, a stage set for a confrontation where words were unnecessary, where every glance and gesture spoke volumes. She swallowed, tasting the metallic tang of her own fear, feeling the weight of the knife's cold handle in her hand, realizing that though she had fled, though she had built a life for Koa, she was now facing the consequences of a secret past, and that this man could dismantle her carefully constructed world with nothing more than a deliberate step forward. Her eyes flitted to Koa's artwork, a starry sky sprawled across the paper, colors smeared and overlapping, chaotic and brilliant, and she felt a pang of sorrow and hope intertwined, a metaphor for the lives tangled in the orbit of Caspian's presence. She tried to breathe, slow her racing heart, but each inhalation seemed to echo through the room, each exhale a reminder of the fragility of safety. Caspian finally stood, a motion deliberate, he slow, terrifying, and her stomach sank as his shadow loomed over her, a giant against the flimsy constructs of her domestic world, and he whispered, almost tenderly despite the danger, "I should kill you for what you took from me, but instead, I'm moving in, because I'm not missing another second." And the words hung in the air, a mini cliffhanger slicing through the tension like a knife. The room seemed to shrink, the walls bending inward, the colors of Koa's painting suddenly brighter, more vivid, as if mocking or illuminating the drama unfolding. And Alara felt the weight of every unsaid word, every hidden secret from 6 years past, pressing down like a physical force. She noticed the faint sheen of sweat on her own palms, the rough texture of the scarf in her hands, the way her hair clung damply to her neck, or all small sensory anchors grounding her in reality, even as the emotional tempest threatened to engulf her. Caspian's eyes lingered on hers, searching, probing, a storm of emotion contained behind the measured calm of a man trained to dominate. And she realized that the domesticity of Koa's laughter, of finger paints and mundane warmth, had never felt more perilous. A creak in the floorboard outside, a door closing somewhere in the distance, and her muscles tensed reflexively, ready to defend, ready to flee, ready to negotiate, all at once. And yet Koa's laughter continued, innocent and pure, a fragile shield against the looming threat. And she wondered, how would you protect your child when the very air is filled with a man's wrath and love? Intertwined? Could you stay standing when the past manifests before you, calm yet lethal? And the sound of the front door clicking shut behind Koa was the first note of tension to settle over the cottage, the lock's metallic click resonating like a gunshot in Alara's chest, and she felt the familiar prickling along her spine, the tingling of adrenaline as her eyes flicked toward Caspian, sitting rigidly at the small kitchen table, every muscle in his body taut, shoulders squared, hands clasped around a steaming mug of coffee that he barely touched, his gaze sweeping the perimeter of the room, the windows, the fenced-in yard outside, alert to a danger that Alara couldn't yet see, but could feel in every vibration of the floor, every creak of the wooden frame of her modest home. The cottage smelled faintly of burnt toast, damp wood from the morning mist still clinging to the corners, or in the acrid tang of the cleaning spray she had hurriedly used to wipe surfaces before he arrived, each scent a reminder of domestic normalcy she no longer believed in. She moved quietly to Koa's backpack, unzipping it, pulling out the school worksheets, smoothing out the crumpled edges with careful fingers. Secondary action grounding her as she tried to steady the storm of panic in her chest, noticing Caspian's eyes flick down to her hands, observing every motion, unspoken questions layered behind his glare. Koa scampered to the table, papers in hand, and began rattling off math problems, his small voice punctuated with laughter and sighs of frustration, and Caspian's massive hand reached over the table, guiding the pencil in Koa's grasp, teaching without words, a predator disguised as a father, and Alara watched in a mixture of awe and terror, wondering how much of the man she had once feared now existed only for protection. The clatter of plates as Caspian helped serve a burnt dinner, smoky edges curling, and the scent of overcooked potatoes mingling with tomato sauce, felt almost like a normal moment until she noticed the small flinch in his posture whenever a shadow passed over the window, a silent signal that danger wasn't far away. Alara moved behind the counter, chopping vegetables for a salad, the knife rhythmic against the cutting board, each slice a secondary action allowing her mind to spiral into planning, panic, and strategy, while Caspian leaned in slightly to watch Koa solve a particularly tricky multiplication problem, his lips pressed into a thin line, jaw tense, fingers drumming faintly against the table, a silent metronome of controlled tension, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of a clock, the low creak of the floorboards under the chairs, all became amplified, and each sound a possible harbinger of approaching trouble. And she realized that in this home, every ordinary noise carried extraordinary meaning. She noticed how Caspian never looked at the ceiling, never glanced upward at the light fixtures, never wasted his gaze. Every glance measured, deliberate, scanning for threats, and yet his hands, massive and scarred, moved with the precision of a man trained to wield power in both office and battlefield, tapping pens, adjusting a book, smoothing a napkin, small gestures masking the torrent of vigilance beneath. Koa laughed again, completely unaware of the tension threading through the cottage like barbed wire, and Alara felt a pang in her chest, both relief and terror intertwined, a duality that made her fingers tighten around the knife resting against the counter edge, or a faint metallic tang mixing with the aroma of fresh parsley and garlic she had chopped. She noticed a small reflection in the window, a flicker of movement in the shadowed yard, and her chest tightened instantly, a mini cliffhanger, a reminder that nothing was ever simple, that Caspian's presence didn't guarantee safety, only a temporary shield. Caspian's eyes narrowed slightly, catching her glance, and without words he communicated the unspoken. Stay calm. Trust the perimeter. Do not give away position. And Alara realized how instinctively she now followed his cues, a silent choreography of survival playing out in her own kitchen. She washed a dish, fingers submerged in soapy water, feeling the slick, warm bubbles slide over her palms, a grounding sensory detail as the weight of fear pressed on her shoulders. And she noticed Caspian's hand hovering over the boy's chair, ready to intervene at the slightest sign of danger, a predator always poised. The faint rustle of leaves outside, a car door slam in the distance, made her flinch, knife tapping against the counter lightly, a warning signal in her subconscious while Caspian barely shifted, eyes tracking, calculating, and she felt a strange mixture of awe and frustration, realizing that he was both protector and enforcer, father and weapon, all in one. She noticed small cracks in her floorboard, tiny scratches that made subtle noises as she moved, amplifying the tension, each minor sound a mini cliffhanger. And she wondered if anyone else could feel the electric weight that filled the room, the subtle magnetic pull between fear and familial connection. Koa's homework finished. Then he dragged the chair back, the scrape sharp in the silence, and Caspian leaned back slightly, letting the sound pass without a flicker of alarm, a carefully measured response designed to teach the child to live in a world with rules and unpredictability coexisting. Alara felt her muscles relax fractionally, the secondary action of folding laundry waiting nearby grounding her. Yet every glance toward the door, the window, or the yard pulled her back into alertness. The cottage a temporary fortress, each ordinary object transformed into a tool or potential shield. The smell of coffee still warm in Caspian's mug mingled with the lingering scent of burnt toast and fresh herbs, layering domesticity over danger, a metaphorical layering of war in a peaceful home. He adjusted a chair slightly, the fabric creaking, and his massive hands brushing against worn wood, and Alara felt the juxtaposition, the soft tactile sensation of wood against skin, the immense contained power of a man who had once ruled empires. And she shivered, realizing every moment of calm was a suspended breath in the storm. She wiped a spill of tomato sauce from the table, her hand brushing against Caspian's, the proximity a silent electric pulse, small gesture loaded with subtext, anger, longing, threat, regret, and perhaps a tentative truce forming in microseconds of human contact. Outside, a crow cawed, loud, sharp, unnatural in timing, a minor cliffhanger, and Alara's gaze snapped to the window, half expecting a sniper, a watcher, a signal of the storm that had followed Caspian to her doorstep. She folded laundry, shirt by shirt, each movement mechanical yet loaded with tension, with feeling the soft cotton against her palms, grounding her while her mind raced. The cottage, her life, Koa's safety, every variable under scrutiny. Caspian's gaze swept over the yard, fingers flexing, resting lightly on a chair, ready to spring into motion if danger emerged, and Alara felt the electric charge between vigilance and domesticity, each breath a metaphorical layering of war and calm. The faint creak of the floorboard outside again, the soft rustle of leaves, the smell of rain still lingering in the grass beyond the fence, and she realized the hunters weren't far. The red laser dot of danger dancing in her peripheral imagination, waiting, probing, testing. Caspian helped Koa brush his teeth, the small bathroom echoing with the faint squeak of bristles, the hum of running water. Each mundane sound weighted with the tension of potential violence outside. As he tucked Koa into bed, adjusting the blanket, smoothing hair from his forehead, the laser dot, real this time, darted across the pillow, pinprick of red light signaling Hunter's presence, and Alara's stomach lurched, a cliffhanger that hit harder than any words. The room smelled faintly of lavender, clean sheets, and fear, an intoxicating mixture, and she felt every nerve in her body tighten, adrenaline and dread coiling through her muscles. Caspian's hand rested briefly on Koa's shoulder, a grounding presence, yet his eyes were sharp, trained, scanning the darkened corners of the room, the window ledges, the hallway. He whispered almost imperceptibly to Alara, "Stay ready," the words hanging in the air like a warning bell, and she felt the tension spike, a silent promise of imminent danger. She noticed her hands trembling slightly, knuckles white as she clutched the blanket, the tactile weight of responsibility pressing on her, her senses heightened, aware of every faint creak, every shift in air, every distant sound outside the walls. The clock ticked, each second a minor cliffhanger, each tick a heartbeat of suspense. And she realized that this domestic war was far from over, that the cottage, her sanctuary, was now the front line of a storm that would not relent. A shadow passed beyond the window, faint, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her inhale sharply, and she asked herself, have you ever felt completely safe in your own home, only to realize that someone watching could decide the rules of survival in a single moment? Caspian's massive silhouette lingered in the doorway as he left the room, ready to check the perimeter again, the laser dot still flickering faintly, and Alara's eyes followed him, knowing the next 48 hours would stretch every limit of her endurance, resilience, and courage. And the cottage, warm and lit softly by the bedside lamp, seemed suddenly both fragile and fortified. Each object, each gesture, on a potential shield, each breath, a battle. The faint hum of the heater, the smell of freshly laundered sheets, the softness of the blanket in her hands, the small, steady rise and fall of Koa's chest, all juxtaposed against the red pinprick of light dancing across the pillow. And she realized that her quiet life had become the epicenter of an invisible war, and the stakes had never been higher. The sudden sharp crack of a silenced gunshot shredded the quiet of the cottage, like paper tearing in slow motion, and the splintering of glass rained down around Alara, each shard catching the dim light and glittering like frozen diamonds, the sharp tang of ozone and shattered window cutting through the faint scent of lavender and laundry that still lingered from Koa's bedtime. Panic gripped her stomach in iron claws, twisting and squeezing as her pulse thundered in her ears, and the knife she had been clutching earlier felt suddenly useless, a cold, lifeless weight in her trembling hand. Before she could process, Caspian moved, an explosion of speed and muscle, a predator made flesh, and he tackled her to the floor, his body heavy, warm, an unmovable shield, and she felt the vibrations of impact jolt through her chest as shards of glass bounced off his broad shoulders and scattered across the hardwood, crunching under the force. "Get to the basement, take the boy, and don't come out until I say his name," he roared. The voice of a man who had shed all pretense, raw and feral, shaking the walls themselves with the ferocity of his command, and it stripped away any illusion of the domesticity that had only moments before filled the room. She scrambled, on every movement frantic, adrenaline sharpening her vision, the floor slippery with scattered glass and the metallic tang of panic mixing with the faint perfume of burnt toast still clinging to the air. And she ducked into Koa's room, heart in her throat, knees quivering as she lifted the trembling boy into her arms, feeling his warmth, his rapid heartbeat against her chest, a fragile, pulsing anchor in the storm. Caspian's massive hand shot toward the suitcase by the door, and in a smooth, practiced motion, he revealed a hidden compartment, sliding it open to expose a gleaming silver handgun, its polished metal glinting under the dim overhead light, and Alara felt a jolt of fear and awe, simultaneously mesmerized and terrified, or her breath catching as she realized the man she had fled from for 6 years now embodied both her nightmare and her salvation. He looked at her then, a gaze so intense and filled with raw, unfiltered love that it splintered her heart into sharp, bleeding fragments, every unspoken apology, every regret from the past coiled into that single moment, and she felt tears sting her eyes even as terror surged through her veins. The intruders had breached the outer perimeter, and the house erupted into a chaotic symphony of muffled thuds, splintering wood, and the dull thump of boots against floorboards, each sound amplified through the small cottage like the beating of a war drum. Alara ducked behind Koa's dresser, the smooth, cold surface pressing into her palms as she held him close, on smelling the faint aroma of his shampoo and the lingering sweetness of bedtime milk, grounding her while the world outside that fragile haven collapsed into violence. The hum of the refrigerator, once mundane, now sounded like an ominous pulse, a countdown to disaster, and the faint creak of the floorboards above told her Caspian was engaging them, moving like a shadow with lethal intent, his body a weapon, his mind a battlefield of strategy and instinct. The smell of gunpowder drifted faintly through the cracks in the walls, mixing with the coppery scent of blood that made her stomach turn and her mouth dry, and each thud above felt like a personal blow, each muffled shout or grunt echoing in her bones, reminding her that the man she had once feared was fighting for their lives, for her life, for Koa's life. She felt the warmth of Koa's body against hers, his small hands clutching her arm, nails digging gently, grounding her in the sensory anchor of the present, while the chaos spun around them, a juxtaposition of innocence and terror that made her knees weak. Her fingers brushed the edge of the dresser repeatedly, a secondary action allowing her mind to process the violence, each scrape a tiny percussion against the larger symphony of gunfire and shattering glass. The soft scuff of Caspian's boots above told her he was moving from room to room, clearing threats, his massive frame a blur of lethal efficiency, and she imagined him taking blows, returning them, each calculated step a heartbeat of survival. Her ears picked up the faint click of a safety being disengaged, the subtle metallic scrape of a magazine being loaded, and she realized that this wasn't just defense, it was a war, choreographed in silence, in movement, in the deadly rhythm of a man who had once commanded empires. The shadow of one intruder flitted across the hallway, brief, but enough to make her heart stutter, and she pulled Koa closer, feeling the warmth of his body, smelling his shampoo, the soft cotton of his pajamas against her skin, a delicate contrast to the metal and violence surrounding them. She counted each muffled thud, each subtle shift of weight above, trying to estimate how far Caspian had progressed, each breath a gamble. A faint groan, possibly from a falling intruder or Caspian himself, made her flinch, and she pressed Koa's small body closer, whispering, "It's okay, baby. It's okay," even as her own voice trembled with fear. Shards of glass in the living room floor reflected the dim light, sparkling like stars in a shattered sky, each glint a reminder that danger was everywhere. Yet her eyes kept darting to the base of the stairs, imagining every possible angle of attack. She felt the metallic tang of blood in the air now, sharper, closer, mixing with the faint, acrid smell of burnt paint from the fireplace, the sensory overload sending adrenaline surging. The silence that followed a particularly loud crash above made her ears ring, and she realized she could hear her own heartbeat, the subtle rustle of Koa shifting in her arms, and the faint, rhythmic drip of something onto the carpet. She wondered briefly, have you ever felt trapped in your own home, knowing a man you love is risking everything just so you and your child can survive? Could you feel fear and awe in equal measure, suspended in time? The low thump of Caspian's hand hitting a wall, the dull crunch of wood splintering under pressure, told her he was engaging physically, and she imagined the sheer force behind each move, massive, precise, controlled by years of brutal experience. Koa squirmed slightly, his small fingers brushing her cheek, and she felt a brief grounding warmth, a reminder of what mattered most, even as the danger loomed over them. The faint click of a gun being cocked, the low whisper of Caspian's own breath above, the soft shuffle of intruder movements, all layered into a tense, sensory tapestry of survival. Her hands rubbed Koa's back gently, feeling the rise and fall of his chest, soft pajamas against her palm, the warmth grounding her, while the chaos above threatened to fracture everything. She heard a dull crash, followed by a thud that made her stomach lurch, and she imagined Caspian absorbing every hit, deflecting every attack, moving with the deadly precision of a man trained to dominate every battlefield. A small squeak from the floorboard above made her flinch. Koa looked at her with wide eyes and she whispered, "It's just Daddy, baby. Just Daddy." Trying to convince herself as much as him The faint metallic scent of a bullet casing, warm and coppery, drifted down to the basement, subtle yet unmistakable, and she realized how close they were to the edge of disaster. Each muffled grunt, each subtle creak of floorboards, every heartbeat a reminder of fragility and mortality. Caspian's massive silhouette blocked the faint light from the stairwell for a fleeting moment, then moved again, and she imagined the lethal efficiency of his hands, the sheer weight of his body protecting them. The basement felt smaller, darker, heavier, every shadow stretching ominously, yet the softness of Koa's breathing against her chest offered a small oasis in the storm. A faint, wet thwack told her something heavy had fallen above, and she imagined Caspian moving, defending, attacking, a symphony of chaos, her palms pressed against Koa's back, feeling the warmth, the softness, the pulse of life, while the house above sang a violent lullaby of power, survival, and fear. And then, after what felt like hours, a heavy silence descended, thicker than the gunfire, filled with tension, anticipation, and the terrifying unknown. She crept to the stairs, each step deliberate, feeling the cold wood under her toes, every nerve screaming as she climbed, muscles taut, heart hammering, and at the top she froze. Caspian slumped against the front door, white shirt soaked crimson, body heavy, phone in his massive hand with a message typed out to his lawyer. Eyes closed briefly, a look of exhaustion, determination, and love mingled in the lines of his face. A cliffhanger frozen in time, a tableau of war, devotion, and fragility. The faint scent of gunpowder, iron, and sweat clung to the air, a reminder of what had transpired, while the warm, domestic smells of burnt food and lavender lingered, a surreal contrast grounding her senses. She swallowed, tasting coppery tang in her mouth. Heart still hammering, realizing the man she had once feared had risked everything for them, and the moment hung like a knife's edge between relief, terror, and awe. Her eyes caught the slight tremor in his hands, the faint rise and fall of his chest as he tried to recover, and she wondered, who would survive this storm unscathed, and what cost does love demand when blood has been shed to protect it? 6. The screech of tires on gravel split the quiet morning air as Caspian yanked open the driver's side door, the metallic clang echoing against the pines, and the acrid stench of blood, sweat, and gunpowder clung to his clothes, stiffening with the cold mist as he dragged Alara and Koa into the reinforced car, the smell of leather and engine oil blending with the metallic tang of panic. Alara's hands trembled as she clutched Koa to her chest, feeling his small heartbeat racing against hers, the warmth of his body grounding her as the distant roar of engines grew louder, echoing like a pack of wolves closing in through the tree line. Caspian's hand rested lightly on the steering wheel at first, but then gripped it with white-knuckled intensity, knuckles blooming red from pressure, veins prominent, a physical manifestation of every ounce of adrenaline and fury coursing through him. The black SUVs burst from the shadows of the driveway, tires biting into the asphalt, engines growling like predators, their headlights piercing through the early fog, creating long, ghostly beams that reflected off the wet leaves and slick road. The smell of wet earth and pine needles filled Alara's nostrils as the car lurched onto the winding forest road, and the reinforced vehicle groaning under the stress, the tires skimming over loose rocks, each vibration a jolt through her spine, threatening to throw Koa from her arms. Caspian's pale face was a study in terrifying determination. A man who had once commanded empires now reduced to the singular mission of survival, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, tracking the closing SUVs, the muscles in his jaw tight, lips pressed in a thin line, and Alara noticed the slight tremor of his bloody fingers on the wheel, a reminder that he was human, vulnerable, yet unyielding. The tires screamed against the asphalt as he wove through the curves, narrowly missing a tree, the branches whipping past the windows, scratching against the reinforced glass, leaving streaks of green and brown, each heartbeat a countdown. Koa's small hands pressed against Alara's chest, his tiny nails scratching, a tactile anchor as he murmured questions she couldn't answer yet, his voice tremulous, innocent, unaware of the magnitude of danger, the faint click of a loose strap inside the car, the slight rattle of the dashboard, every minor sound amplified in the tense cocoon of metal and fear. And Alara's eyes darted to Caspian, noticing how he controlled the shaking of his arm as he shifted gears, every motion precise despite blood loss. The roar of engines behind them surged, black SUVs hammering down the forest road, bumpers ramming at the reinforced rear, the impact jarring the car violently, throwing Koa against her chest for a second, and she hugged him tighter. The warmth and softness of his pajamas pressed against her skin, grounding her through the chaos. Caspian's lips moved slightly, a low mutter under his breath, a secondary action as he calculated angles, distances, and timing, each flick of his bloody hand, shifting gears, applying pressure to brakes, counter-steering with perfect coordination. A man possessed by both love and rage. A sharp crack as one SUV's tire clipped a rock, sending debris bouncing, and Alara flinched, the sound slicing through the misty air, the scent of pine, rain-soaked earth, and metal blended in the cabin, each inhale a reminder of the wilderness closing in, trapping them in a living corridor of trees and danger. The reinforced car jolted over a fallen branch, tires squealing, suspension groaning, and Caspian's voice broke the tense silence for the first time, rough, guttural. "Hold on! This next turn's a gamble!" The words were both warning and promise, and Alara's stomach dropped as the curve appeared. Sheer cliff to one side, ravine plunging into shadows. Koa's small, warm hands gripped her shirt, and she felt the rapid pulse of his little heart against her chest, a living timer, a reminder that every second counted. Every breath might be the last if Caspian miscalculated. The black SUVs gained ground, the bumper of one ramming the car's reinforced rear, a metallic groan resounding, shaking the entire cabin, and she saw Caspian's jaw tighten, a bead of blood dripping from his temple onto the wheel, mixing with sweat. But he did not falter. The tires skidded briefly on wet leaves, a heart-stopping moment, the car swaying perilously, and she imagined the drop, the dark ravine below, the cold, unforgiving rocks waiting. He glanced into the rearview mirror, his eyes locking with hers for a heartbeat, a silent connection passing through the shared terror. "Trust me," the look said. No words, just raw intent, a man willing to risk everything, body, empire, life, for hers and Koa's. The branches whipped past the side windows, scraping, cracking the outer layer of reinforced glass, the scent of wet bark and resin invading the cabin, each scrape a reminder of the encroaching wilderness, the unpredictable environment he now fought against. Caspian shifted gears, blood-slick fingers barely controlling the steering wheel as the road curved sharply, tires clawing for grip, suspension straining, and Alara gritted her teeth. Koa's small body pressed against hers, every muscle taut, eyes darting to the rearview mirror, calculating distance. The timing and the shadows of approaching SUVs. The roar of engines behind them intensified, horns blaring, metal scraping metal, the pursuit growing relentless, and she felt a pang of awe, realizing that the man who once ruled with cold calculation now fought with heart, instinct, and desperation. A stone kicked up by the pursuing vehicle bounced off the roof, denting the reinforced metal, the impact vibrating through her palms as she gripped Koa tighter, the tactile sensation grounding her amidst the chaos. Caspian's low growl of concentration, the guttural sound of exertion, punctuated the symphony of destruction around them, a human sound tethered to survival. She noticed a flash of metal from one SUV's driver's side, a rifle or possibly a spotlight, eyes widening, pulse racing. The road narrowed, jagged rocks lined one side, ravine the other, and the reinforced car swerved, tires squealing as Caspian leaned into the turn, calculating angle, friction, momentum, a metaphorical layering of risk, strategy, and love. Koa whimpered softly, and Alara whispered soothing words, rubbing his back, feeling the soft cotton of his pajamas against her fingertips, grounding both of them while adrenaline surged. The black SUVs pressed closer, engines growling, bumpers colliding intermittently, Caspian muttering numbers under his breath, a secondary action anchoring him in calculation amidst chaos. A sudden flash of light from one of the vehicles reflected in the rearview mirror, illuminating a glint of metal, and she realized just how close death was at every turn. The tires screamed against moss-covered patches, sending sprays of water and leaves into the air. The scent of wet earth and ozone filling the car, each inhalation sharp and biting. Caspian's eyes flicked to Koa briefly, then to Alara, a terrifyingly beautiful resolve in his gaze, a silent promise that he would survive, no matter the cost, and she felt a surge of love mingled with terror. A branch struck the windshield, cracking the outer layer, and she flinched as tiny spiderweb fractures ran across it, each one a mini cliffhanger marking the narrowing margin between life and death. He shouted over the roar of engines, "Hold him! Don't let go!" And Alara clutched Koa tighter, feeling the pressure of her own heartbeat, matching the rhythm of the tires against the asphalt, the rumble of the engine vibrating through the seat, a symphony of fear and survival. The car leapt over a small dip, tires leaving the asphalt briefly. Miss Suspension groaning, landing hard, and she felt Koa's body jolt against hers, the soft warmth of his skin a stark contrast to the chaos. Another SUV clipped the reinforced rear again, metal screeching, the echo bouncing through the trees, a cliffhanger that made her stomach drop. Caspian's bloody fingers gripped the wheel with iron precision, knuckles white, veins prominent, eyes scanning every shadow, calculating every curve, every elevation change, every potential ambush. The mist swirled around them, condensation dripping onto the windshield, further obscuring vision, the damp smell of the forest mixing with gasoline, blood, and adrenaline. She noticed how every shift of Caspian's body, every tap of his foot, every slight tilt of his head was a secondary action layered with survival instinct. The rearview mirror reflected flashing headlights, shadows of SUVs pressing relentlessly, each one a moving threat. The road narrowed further, sheer drop to one side, jagged rocks below, and Caspian muttered, "I'm gonna jump, and if I don't make it, tell him I was a better man than I actually was." His hand hovered over the door handle, the metallic cold against his bloodied fingers, a final, terrifying promise, and Alara's stomach lurched. Koa's small face buried against hers, eyes wide with instinctive fear. The wind rushed through the cracked window, carrying the scent of pine and danger, leaves whipping past, a sensory immersion of flight, survival, and unspoken love. The reinforced car approached a bend where the cliffside dropped abruptly. The angle calculated, the tires squealing, engine screaming. Whoa, and she realized that Caspian's jump wasn't surrender. It was strategy, sacrifice, the apex of trust and love. Koa whimpered, small hand brushing her cheek, and she whispered in a trembling voice, "He's your daddy. He's your daddy. And he's amazing." Even as tears streaked down her face, heart hammering. The shadow of Caspian's body moved toward the open door, a blur against the mist, adrenaline and fear so palpable it felt like a physical wall in the car. And Alara braced herself, each second a mini cliffhanger. The forest around them became a tunnel of sound and motion, leaves whipping, branches scraping reinforced metal, engine growl echoing, adrenaline in every nerve. The tires clattered over roots, rocks, uneven terrain, Caspian's muscles taut, calculation and raw power intertwined, on a terrifyingly beautiful display of human resilience. The black SUVs followed blindly, bumpers ramming, engines screaming, each impact a threat to send the car into the abyss. Koa's small hand gripped hers, nails pressing lightly, a grounding tactile anchor as she realized every second counted. Every breath might be the last if Caspian's maneuver failed, and as the reinforced vehicle leapt again over a small rise, wind rushing through the windows, leaves stinging their faces, adrenaline screaming, she knew they were teetering on the edge of survival, caught between death, love, and a father's ultimate sacrifice. 7. The reinforced car hummed along the hidden logging trail, tires crunching over broken branches and wet pine needles, Alara gripping Koa to her chest, his soft breathing a fragile rhythm against the chaos still pounding in her veins, the forest finally eerily silent behind them, save for the distant hum of early morning birds, a small, surreal calm after the storm of death. Her hands shook as she finally stopped the car in a small clearing, the scent of damp earth and cedar thick in the air, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine he hadn't survived, the cold terror clawing at her chest. Hours stretched on like endless shadows as she paced the safe house, the walls echoing with Koa's restless footsteps, her fingers brushing against the rough wooden table, feeling the splinters bite as a tactile reminder of the night's terror. And every creak of the old house made her flinch, expecting him to appear from the shadows. Then, as the first golden rays of dawn pierced through the pine canopy, a solitary figure limped out of the mist, body battered, clothes torn, hair plastered with dried blood. But those eyes, Caspian's eyes, still blazed with life, raw and unbroken. He didn't stride, didn't posture like a mafia boss. He moved slowly, every step a testament to endurance, every labored breath a statement of survival, the forest floor crunching beneath his boots in rhythm with his heartbeat. Alara felt a hollow ache fill her chest, a mixture of relief, love, and exhaustion. As he approached, hands stained and trembling, reaching into his pocket to pull out a stack of documents, thick with the weight of billions and the final surrender of a life built on power and blood. The papers rustled in the morning breeze, a tactile, symbolic gesture, an empire dissolving with the whisper of wind, a kingdom of shadows finally crumbling in his hands. Koa peered from behind Alara, eyes wide, small hand gripping her coat, sensing something monumental yet unknowable in the air, the smell of fresh pine and smoke from the previous night's chaos mingling in his young senses. Caspian's gaze met hers, head bowed, shoulders slumped in unaccustomed humility, offering not threats or demands, but truth, raw and unadorned, the air between them thick with unspoken apologies, grief, and a love that had survived blood, betrayal, also in time. She felt her throat tighten, voice catching, a lump forming as she realized the enormity of the sacrifice. He had destroyed the very world he ruled to gift Koa a normal life, to shield his son from the curse of inherited power. The sunlight glanced off the documents, glinting briefly like a promise, and the wind whispered through the pines, carrying a surreal serenity, a quiet echo of all the battles fought and survived. Caspian shifted slightly, limping toward her, eyes searching for her judgment. And for a heartbeat, the man who had once commanded empires seemed small, human, finally unmasked, offering everything he had never dared before. Alara's hand trembled as she reached for the boy's backpack, simple, worn, filled with crayons and snacks, and she placed it in his hands, her fingers brushing his palm. In a tactile gesture of trust, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Koa squealed softly, excitement bubbling as he tugged at Caspian's sleeve, and for a moment, the past felt like a distant shadow, replaced by the warmth of father and son, tentative yet undeniable. Caspian's eyes softened, and for the first time, there was no calculating monster, no ruthless boss, only a man reborn in the forest's quiet, his empire gone, his soul unshackled, and love unspoken yet fully present. Alara's lips curved in a small, weary smile as she said, almost gently, "You're late for the school drop-off." Her tone light, mundane, yet carrying the weight of all they had survived. The words were simple, ordinary, but in that moment they carried the extraordinary. Life after death, love after loss, humanity after a kingdom of shadows. Caspian looked down at Koa, then at her, a small, almost imperceptible nod, shoulders straightening, the weight of the past finally lifted, and he lifted the boy into his arms, feeling the warmth of his son, the soft smell of morning dew and pine mingling with the lingering scent of danger fading into memory. Together, the trio walked toward the bus stop, the forest behind them silent, sunlight breaking through in golden shards, every step a quiet reclamation of life, every breath a reminder that survival was now intertwined with love, protection, and hope. Koa's laughter rang out, small and pure, bouncing through the clearing, a tether to innocence and a future untainted by blood, while Caspian's grip on his son was firm yet tender, a silent vow to never let the past repeat itself. Alara fell a step behind, watching the man who had once ruled with iron fists now navigate fatherhood with cautious, careful steps, his massive frame bending to Koa's small stature, carrying him with a strength that was both literal and metaphorical. The road ahead was quiet, yet charged with promise. The camera of the mind lingers on Caspian's face, the light catching on blood-streaked skin, hair plastered with sweat and rain, eyes softened, finally home. And as the bus rumbled down the distant road, Koa waving excitedly, Caspian smiled, a rare, unguarded expression, a man finally unburdened, walking beside the boy who carried both the legacy of blood and the hope of a simple, ordinary life. The forest swallowed the echoes of engines, gunfire, and chaos, leaving only sunlight, laughter, and the quiet image of a father and son moving toward a future built not on fear or power, but on love, survival, and human connection. Wow, what a journey, right? Alara, Caspian, and little Koa, surviving impossible odds, facing the ghosts of the past, and discovering that even in a world built on power and blood, love can rebuild everything. Take a moment and think. If you were in Alara's shoes, would you have trusted him after all those years? Or if you were Caspian, could you have let go of everything to protect your family? Tell me in the comments below. Which moment in this story hit you the hardest? The chase, the sacrifice, or that quiet, bittersweet walk to the bus stop? I want to hear your thoughts, your stories, your emotions. If this tale of love, danger, and redemption left your heart racing, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a story that pulls you deep into a world where every heartbeat matters and every choice can change a life. Remember, these stories are created for you, crafted with real human imagination, passion, and heart, just for your entertainment. And the best part? The journey isn't over. There's always another story waiting to challenge your heart, your mind, and your emotions. Until next time. Keep your heart open, your mind alert, and never underestimate the power of love and sacrifice.